Good morning, everyone. We would like to start and continue like that. Welcome to the third panel of this very interesting conference, and I would like to thank both Yoni and Ifat for inviting me and other members of the Asian and African Institute to chair these panels, and thus forcing us to sit here and learn from you about our history. Our third panel is titled Studying Arabic from Europe, Studying Arabic from Palestine, and we have two speakers. I'll start with presenting Amit. Amit Levy is an MA student here at the Department of History, the Hebrew U. He received this year the Talmon Prize for Excellence in his MA studies at the Department of History. Has a forthcoming article in Hebrew in the Hayo Haya journal. It's a student journal based here at the Hebrew U, discussing the use of Arabic in the Palmach during the 1940s, which I'll be very curious to read. Research interests include intellectual encounters and German Orientalism. His talk is titled Man of Contention, Martin Plessner, and we were promised that Amit will refer to Plessner, so I think it would complement the other talks and his encounter with the Orient. Thank you very much. 30 minutes, is it?
Okay, thank you for the introduction. Well, I hope we heard today and yesterday some things about Plessner and about other important scholars.
Can you use the mic, please?
Sorry, okay. That way, is that better? Well, I will try not to repeat things already said, but I think that sometimes this will be unavoidable. And yet, I think that this is a little different angle. So, I will start. Whenever Orientalism is being discussed, there is always an elephant in the room. We spoke about elephants in the room already. That's Edward Said and his criticism of Orientalism. When the topic is German Orientalism, we have Susan Marchand and her comprehensive book on German Orientalism. Marchand is opposing Said's Foucaultian approach and is trying to re-neutralize the term itself, suggesting that as long as it was being practiced for purely academic purposes, German Orientalism as a scientific discipline had no negativity in it. But what happens when the scientific discipline is being transplanted to the space that it is researching? What happens when German Orientalism goes to the Orient, not for a limited scientific excursion, but permanently? What happens when this all happens at the heart of an intensifying conflict between Jews and Arabs, and for many between Occident and Orient? The case of the German Jewish Orientalist Martin Plessner will not give us all the answers, but may help us to at least understand the questions better. The following is a presentation of my MA thesis, still a work in progress, being written these days under the supervision of Professor Ifat Weiss and Dr. Aya Yuna. On my thesis, I focus on the life and work of Martin Plessner, who, like many others, was forced to emigrate from Germany to Palestine after the National Socialists came to power in 1933. Yet for him, as an Orientalist studying Arabic texts from the Middle Ages, the process of immigration, never an easy one, was also a transition from a textual encounter with the Orient to a physical one. The study is an attempt to ask how this transition influenced him, his academic work, his political views, and, following Marchand's argument, the possible link between the two. The primary sources for this examination come first and foremost from archival material in various archives, including the Martin Plessner collection at the National Library here in Jerusalem, which I was able to catalog with the kind support of the Franz Rosenzweig Minerva Center and the German Literature Archive in Marbach. An interview with Plessner's daughter, Professor Hagit Lavsky, and her husband Nathan, was also conducted. They are both honoring us with their presence today, and I hope that this study would also be an appropriate way to honor her father, Zichro Livracha. A short answer to my research question would be no. The change of encounters had no influence on Martin Plessner, but there's a catch, or don't leave yet. I have a longer answer. Plessner tried to keep separating the political sphere from the academic one, But what was relatively easy, or at least easier, in Germany was not always possible after the transition in Palestine and Israel. And some collisions were unavoidable. I will now shortly describe Plessner's career, and then discuss the two spheres and three interesting collisions between them. Martin Meir Plessner was born in the very last days of the year 1900 in Posen to a Zionist family. He studied in Breslau and Berlin and wrote his PhD dissertation in Breslau under the instruction of Gotthelf Bergstresser. By the age of 25, he started working as an assistant to Helmut Ritter in Hamburg. It was then that he decided to focus his own research on the history of science in Islam, medicine alongside astrology, alchemy, and magic. Spending half a year researching with Ritter in Istanbul, Plessner then came back to Bonn University, and in 1931 was invited by Josef Horowitz to Frankfurt. In 1933, however, his promising academic career in Germany ended when he was released from his position. As a result of this, Plessner immigrated to Palestine in April of the same year. With no position available at the Hebrew University, he settled with his young family in the northern city of Haifa. It was Shlomo Dov Goitein, was already mentioned before, who got him a job at the realist school, where he started teaching Arabic. In 1935, he published, as mentioned by Dr. Mendel, an Arabic grammar textbook, the first of its kind in modern Hebrew. In 1945, the Plessner family moved to Jerusalem. Martin taught Arabic at the Ma'aleh School and edited Islam-related entries at the Encyclopedia Ivrit, Encyclopedia Hebraica. He then started working for a library project of the Hebrew University, which will later be discussed. Following that project, he became the librarian of the School of Oriental Studies. In 1952, when he's already 52 years old, Plessner finally started teaching Arabic at the Hebrew University, later becoming an associate professor in the Department of Arabic Language and Literature. He was eventually appointed head of the Department of Islamic Culture, a position which he held until his retirement in 1969. His publication list includes scientific editions, translations, and an impressive amount of book reviews and encyclopedia entries. Thus, Martin Plessner is an optional hero of the story of scholar migration and knowledge transfer, the story of the crystallization of Oriental studies in modern Palestine and the State of Israel. The beginning of this story was exhaustively told yesterday by Professor Mangold Ville, and the main figures were indeed Plessner's teachers, colleagues, and friends, at least to some extent. Whether Plessner was indeed a hero of that story, well, that's a question that I would like to return to at the end. Knowledge transfer from Germany, of course, stands at the very basis of the Hebrew University. The relative uniqueness, and Professor Weiss said something about this possible uniqueness or not. But anyway, this kind of uniqueness, I'm sorry, I lost my... Okay, yeah. So this relative uniqueness of Orientalism as a transferred scientific discipline lies in the transformation of the type of encounter. This shift had different influence on different scholars. For Plessner, I would like to argue, it was not a cause for a major change, neither in his scientific interests, methods, and conceptions, nor in his political views. Furthermore, the professional and the political continued to exist as two separate spheres, two circles with little overlapping. Examining the academic professional sphere, there is a substantial continuity in Martin Plessner's scientific work. A clear line can be drawn from his 1925 PhD dissertation to his latest post-mortem published works. Indeed, his research was nearly stopped after the crisis of 1933, as he was far not only from Germany but also from the scholarly center in Jerusalem. Nevertheless, correspondence from the 1930s and 40s demonstrates Plessner's determination to continue his unfinished work in the same fields with the same methods, which he did eventually only a bit later in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. That was also true in other professional aspects. We all heard from Dr. Mendel earlier about Plessner's part in the formulation of Arabic teaching. Plessner was no doubt a representative of the German philology side. His grammar book was based on German methods and materials. A similar continuity can be found in the political sphere. Clearly, the Jewish Society of Mandate Palestine was intensively politically active, and the migration increased Plessner's political involvement. Increased, but did not change its essence. In Germany, Plessner was a supporter of the Brit Shalom organization. After 1933, already in Palestine, he remained a supporter of binationalism. He was a devoted follower of Yehuda Leib Magnes, enjoyed Ichud in the wake of the Brit Shalom disintegration. In the State of Israel, however, he consistently refused to join any significant party. This does not mean that Plessner kept his opinions to himself. On the contrary, Plessner was an extremely prolific writer of letters to the editors of newspapers, and never hesitated to express his thoughts and ideas, no matter what the issue on the table is. Being a man of principle, he protested against any wrongdoing that crossed paths with him. Political and ideological wrongdoings were, from his dovish point of view, a rather common sight. In 1952, giving a speech at the opening night of an Islamic pottery exhibition in Jerusalem, he praised it for, and I quote, breaking a public ban, explaining that the aim of this ban is to avoid, in his words, any acknowledgement of the Arab presence in the land of Israel. 6 years later, he was invited to Florence to attend a multinational conference addressing the problems of the Mediterranean Sea. When the Israeli delegation angrily quit the discussions, Plessner, who came there as an individual and was not a part of the official delegation, continued to attend the talks, much to the criticism of Israeli officials and newspapers. There was this one article in Ma'ariv that was very critical. He opposed the annexation of the 1967 occupied territories, and even in the midst of the 1933 Yom Kippur War, expressed his hope that when the fog of war cleared, peace will emerge. Therefore, it appears that despite the direct and continuous contact with the Arab population and the experience of the Arab-Jewish conflict in its full intensity, Plessner's political views remained virtually the same and were not influenced by the transition to a physical encounter. However, as I said, the answer is more complex. That is because in mandatory Palestine and in the State of Israel, Plessner did find himself in the middle of several collisions between the two separate worlds that his life consisted of. These forced collisions were a direct result of the 1933 immigration, a number of events in which the sterility of each sphere could not be maintained. Compromise was unavoidable, and that was difficult for a man who despised pragmatism. Each collision had Plessner choosing whether to contradict some of his political stance or ignore academic conventions. The choices he made may help us to understand how the change has influenced him. After all, I would like to move to the second part of my lecture and present three prominent collisions chronologically. The first collision, the first one, dates back to 1938, 5 years after Plessner's arrival to Palestine. As mentioned before, Plessner was an Arabic teacher in Haifa. Loyal to the German tradition, he was teaching literary Arabic, the mainly written universal language, which is being used in literature, newspapers, and official events. I'm sure most of you already know that. That year, a revolutionary decision was made by the education department. From now on, the Arabic taught in school will be colloquial Arabic, the spoken everyday language divided into numerous dialects. Again, those of you who are familiar with colloquial Arabic know how significant its difference from literary Arabic is, regardless of sharing the same foundations. Plessner, whose literary Arabic was flawless, knew the difference very well. He strictly opposed teaching colloquial Arabic before the literary Arabic foundations are firmly laid. Moreover, and perhaps more importantly, his colloquial Arabic skills were quite poor. Recurring jokes, I was just told about one of them from Zolavsky earlier, were made by the school staff on his inability to communicate with the locals from the villages nearby due to the language gap between his literary expressions and their colloquial ones. Accordingly, Plessner did not react well to the news. He wrote an informal grievance letter to Goitain, then the chief supervisor of Hebrew school, hoping to reverse the decision. And that's the letter that Yoni gave a little promo for earlier. Expressing his frustration, Plessner wrote, "For me, this means a complete personal revolution. The understanding that I do not meet the new requirements paralyzes me and strips me of my self-confidence in front of the students. I have never studied nor taught languages in methods other than those of the German gymnasium. I have no tradition of teaching living languages, and my Arabic skills need a lot of improvement. Colloquial Arabic was not a part of Plessner's life, and he explained that a long vacation would be needed in order to get closer to, and I quote, the Arab surrounding, where I would be able to release myself of the indistinction between book-oriented knowledge and the actual spoken language. The decision was indeed reversed eventually, at least to some extent. Plessner was not required to start learning and teaching colloquial Arabic, as far as the sources tell us. His aforementioned response, however, might seem surprising. Since he was an enthusiastic supporter of binationalism, it is not far-fetched to assume that 5 years of living in the mixed city of Haifa would suffice if one wishes to get a proper grasp of the local dialect. Yet for Plessner, language belonged to the academic sphere, and therefore needed to be approached linguistically. In the German linguistic tradition of the early 20th century, colloquial language was usually treated as inferior. Indeed, Plessner was never taught to handle this kind of Arabic. It seems that the encounter with a living language left Plessner confused. In the very same letter to Goitein, he did agree that the new decision is, in his words, undeniably justified. Nevertheless, he recoiled from this particular challenge, from the breach of his disciplinary guidelines. When the political and the professional collided, Plessner was not particularly hesitant to keep it professional. About a decade later, in 1949, a second collision is observed. The battle for Jerusalem was over, and the Plessner family was already living in the city for a few years. Martin was trying to get his foot in the door of the Hebrew University, and the long-awaited opportunity finally came. The National University Library started the project of collecting, cataloging, and preserving what was known as abandoned property, libraries of Palestinian scholars in West Jerusalem, left behind when their owners fled their homes during the 1948 war. By Goitein's recommendation, in October 1949, Plessner was assigned by the National Library to catalog one of the abandoned libraries. This foot in the door was indeed paved his way into the Hebrew University. Thus, the work on the abandoned property was important for Plessner's career and could also be justified with preservation purposes for science. Well, if Edward Said is our one elephant in the room, and we have Susan Marchand, so now we have a third elephant when we're discussing abandoned property, and that's Gish Amit and his controversial work. Amit argues that there were possible aspects of theft and appropriation in this project, and questions of past and present ownership rise. I will not discuss Amit's arguments today. I do think that his study encourages us to ask an important question when we're examining Plessner's involvement in the project. How did Plessner feel about it? It is quite reasonable to assume that Plessner was aware of the complexity here. Before 1948, the Plessner family lived in the mixed neighborhood Katamon in Jerusalem, and their neighbors were and owners of the house were the Palestinian Khoury family. The father and Martin had very good relations, and Professor Lavsky remembers being best friends with the young Khoury daughter Leila. During the war, the Khoury family fled to Bet Jala, a town near Bethlehem, which remained under Jordanian control. When the Plessner family returned to their home, Martin took his kids to the vacant Khoury house and explicitly warned them not to take anything that doesn't belong to them. His respect for the property of the Khoury family was unequivocal. Moreover, Martin remained in contact with the father after 1948, and at the father's request was delivering him books from his abandoned library. The two remained in contact until the father's death. Thus, Plessner knew first-handedly the agony of Palestinian scholars separated from their books. Despite of that, he chose to join the project. Unfortunately, I couldn't find any documentation in which he expresses his thoughts regarding this chapter of his life, but interestingly enough, he never told his daughter about his participation in the project. Considering that she is fairly knowledgeable about her father's life, this may be an indication to his feelings about it. Was that necessary evil for him? We may never know. In any case, from this personal angle, the professional views and needs overcome any possible political resentment. The first years of Plessner in the Hebrew University provide us with a third collision. In an interview conducted with Yitzhak Kister, the son of Plessner's colleague Meir Yaakov Kister, who was...
Brother. Yitzhak Kister, the Chief Justice.
So I'm sorry, but there was also...
אחיו, שופט עליון.
Okay, so,
אתה מתכוון לבן?
לבן.
הבן שהוא פרופסור כאן במנחם.
Sorry, of course. Yes, of course. Menachem. Thank you. So Menachem Kister recalled that his father told him how he had to persuade Plessner into teaching Arab students. The reason for Plessner's initial refusal was their inability, as he saw it, to accept the fact that he, a Jew, knows Arabic better than they do, and we can add to that also that he thought that they were simply a bit lazy. Plessner's records from his courses at the Hebrew University include several Arab names, which means that he was indeed persuaded eventually. However, his general opinion on this matter did not change. In a letter published in Haaretz in 1963, more than 10 years after he started teaching at the Hebrew University, he complains about the quality of education in Arab high schools, concluding with a poignant remark. And I quote, "Every Arab high school graduate who comes to us Arabic teachers, becomes a special instructional problem. Once again, the academic defeats the political. Plessner wished with all his heart for peace and coexistence with the Arab population. But once the issue entered the academic domain, he was not willing to compromise for the sake of this aspiration, and preferred to remain loyal to the standards he believed in. It should be also noted that all correspondence with his Arab students was in Hebrew as far as the archival material shows. Unlike colloquial Arabic, Plessner's literary Arabic was more than sufficient for writing a letter. What could have been an appropriate gesture of coexistence. Perhaps that kind of political gesture could not meet, once again, the academic standard. Now it is time to reconsider Plessner's candidacy for being the hero of the Hebrew University Orientalism story. It is, in my opinion, that Plessner was not its hero, but its maybe anti-hero. Unlike many of his generation, his name is collectively, and unfortunately that is the case, collectively forgotten today in Israel. And unlike many of his colleagues, he has not become a prominent figure in Israeli Orientalism. His personal story of encounter with the Orient is not a story of success and re-establishment, rather a story of crises and missed opportunities. Never being promoted from his position as head of Islamic Culture Department, he retired as an associate professor with virtually no monographs published. This, of course, has a lot to do with timing, only starting to teach at the university when he's over 50, and with his personality, since he was very bad in office politics. Still, I believe that this also has to do with the inevitable collision of his two internal worlds. His daughter remembers him sitting to his desk a lot, not promoting his research, but writing yet another grievance letter, making another political statement. This may have been a price he had to pay to himself for constantly keeping political energy out of the academic sphere. As he was constantly being left out or coming too late, his perspective on Orientalism in Mandate Palestine and Israel allows us to see the bigger processes through the eyes of an outsider, a person who most of the times had to adapt rather than formulate. On a concluding remark, the headline of this talk requires some clarification. Martin Plessner was indeed a man of contention. His daughter and son-in-law acknowledge that. The archival material also acknowledges that. But there is another way to understand this phrase. Plessner grew up and was shaped in an era of contention. From World War I to Yom Kippur War, 1973, wars and national conflicts always stood in the background of crucial years of his life, dictated many of the events. The collisions he experienced in Palestine and Israel were a part of that. On November 27, 1973, almost 73 years old, Plessner's heart stopped, with no history of heart disease. I do not want to sound too dramatic, but I can't help but wonder whether another round of despairing fighting was simply too much for him. It seems like contention ultimately defeated the man who wanted, perhaps more than everything, peace and reconciliation. Thank you.
I must state again that parts of this talk again sounded painfully contemporary. Our second speaker is Abigail Jacobson, and it's my honor and pleasure to present her again. It's the second time I'm sharing, second or third now.
It's a tradition.
It's becoming a tradition. So thank you again, Yoni and Ifat, for inviting me. Abigail is working on intercommunal relations in late Ottoman and mandatory Palestine. Her first book is entitled From Empire to Empire, Jerusalem Between Ottoman and British Rule. And she now completed a book manuscript entitled Oriental Neighbors, Middle Eastern Jews and Arabs in Mandatory Palestine, written together with Dr. Moshe Naor. She teaches at the Department of History at MIT and hopefully coming back to Israel soon.
Thank you very much all for coming, and thank you Ifrat and Yoni for inviting me, and React for your introduction, your friendship, etc. My talk is very much, I think, corresponds with two talks that we had yesterday, mainly with Yuval's talk about Yehuda, as well as, I guess, with Lior's talk earlier this morning, which I had to miss, but in general with Yoni's and Lior's works, which we'll hear about in my talk today. It's, as Liat said, it's a part of a project that was just completed, thank God, with my friend and colleague Moshe Naor, and this is a book about Oriental neighbors, entitled Oriental Neighbors, and about the very complex relations between Jews, what we call local Jews or Oriental Jews, and the names really matter here, and Arabs in mandatory Palestine. So this is the context of this talk. And let's see if the PowerPoint works. And it doesn't. What am I supposed to do? No. No. He's thinking. Oh. אז רגע, אז איך הם... עכשיו זה כזה. I always tell my students at MIT that I'm so technologically challenged that it's really a mystery. How did I end up teaching at MIT? And it's always the computers. Yeah. Okay. In October 7th, 1942, Dr. Gershon Barak, a psychoanalyst from Tel Aviv, wrote a letter to Dr. Israel Ben-Zeev, the inspector of Arabic studies at the Department of Education in the Jewish National Council. In the letter, he asked for a recommendation for an Arabic teacher in Tel Aviv. According to Barak, he has been studying Arabic for quite some time and can read a newspaper or an easy book with the assistance of a dictionary. He first learned Arabic with Abraham Levy, a young teacher originally from Tiberias, and later studied in a small group which was guided by Nissim Alui, the Maghrebi journalist and Zionist activist that some of you may be familiar with. He wishes to continue studying Arabic, but in Tel Aviv, he only heard about Arabic courses that are taught by European teachers. I insist on and wish to study only with a native of the Orient, Ben HaMizrach, because I'm native of the country to the country myself, Yelid Haaretz. I'm writing to ask if you can refer me to an Arabic study group in Tel Aviv that is guided by a teacher who is of Oriental descent, Eda Mizrachit, or an Arabic teacher that I may join. End of quote. Barak joins many other requests that Dr. Israel Ben-Zeev received during his tenure as the Arabic teacher inspector at the Jewish National Council, a position that he held since 1938 until his retirement in the mid-1960s. As such, Ben-Zeev was in charge of enhancing the teaching of Arabic in Jewish schools in Palestine, of organizing training seminars and meetings for Arabic teachers throughout the country, and of developing a curriculum and writing textbooks for the teaching of colloquial and standard Arabic. For Ben-Zeev, Arabic was more than just a language, though. As Liora Halperin discusses in her work, he considered the knowledge of Arabic as essential for Jews living in Palestine and viewed it as a way of creating contacts and links between Jews and Arabs in Palestine, both in daily life, as well as a medium for cultural exchange. According to Ben Ze'ev, quote, "Our children, those who were born in Eretz Israel and those who return to it, meet the Arabs and their children who are passing in our streets, buying and selling in our markets and stores on a daily basis. Many Jews live in mixed neighborhoods or in close proximity to Arab settlements. Our students pass near an Arab village or an Arab neighborhood without knowing anything about these people, their language and manners, their ways of life, other than the news they get from the newspapers or radio. Without knowing the language, the Hebrew child will not know how to ask for water and will not be able to thank a good advice that he would get. From all reasons, both cultural and practical, the Arabic colloquial language, the Arabic culture and geography have a national value, and the elementary schools should acquire them to the students." Ben Ze'ev's reflection consists of some of the issues that I would like to discuss today. The two reasons that he mentioned for the study of Arabic, the cultural and practical ones, represent a growing tension between two approaches towards the importance of studying Arabic, which Yoni Mendel calls the language of the neighbor versus the language of the enemy approaches. According to Mendel, during the mandatory years, and especially following the Arab Revolt, the study of Arabic became much more associated with the latter, that is the language of the enemy, and was a result of security and political needs and concerns of the Jewish issue. While these two pillars existed in the Arabic study apparatus during the 1930s and 1940s, in this talk I would like to propose some additional dimensions to those offered by Mendel and show that the seemingly dichotomy was much more nuanced. Mainly, I would like to focus on the role of local Jews, both Ashkenazi and Sephardi, apropos Yuval's talk from yesterday, the native speakers of Arabic, as educators, teachers, translators, and promoters of Arabic, and especially to look into the role of Israel Ben Ze'ev and other members of the Arabic teaching committee. Their approach, that Liora calls the pro-communication approach, suggests an approach of linguistic cultural mediation that was led by local Jews, fluent in Arabic, who felt that the language can bridge between Jewish and Arab communities, the Jewish and Arab communities in Palestine, and link the Palestinian locale to its surrounding Middle Eastern environment. And this linkage is very, very important for me. It's not only Palestine, it's also the area. It's also the surrounding Middle Eastern locale. Hence, figures like Israel Ben Ze'ev, Avraham El-Malech, Yosef Yoel Rivlin, which we heard about yesterday by Hanan, David Yalin, and the Shamosh brothers, among others, were active not only in Arabic teaching, but were also engaged in translating literary texts from Arabic to Hebrew and vice versa, in teaching Hebrew in Jewish schools in the Arab world, as mentioned earlier by Yoni, and in maintaining contacts among Jewish and Arab teachers and intellectuals. Learning Arabic is part of Zionism, wrote Shlomo Dov Goiten in a very important and well-known quote, a professor, of course, of Oriental Studies here at the Hebrew University in 1946. And indeed, debates over the place of Arabic in the Yishuv, its uses, perceptions, and the ways to study it took place within different Zionist circles already at the end of Ottoman rule in Palestine. And I won't get into these debates. This is a very interesting story, but different from what I want to tell about today. Those debates took a different turn, of course, as a result of the transition to British mandatory rule, the institutionalization of the Zionist movement, and with the intensification of the conflict. In this talk, then, I would like to focus specifically on the special dimension offered by local Jews to these questions. Israel Ben Ze'ev's biography is very important in order to understand his perspective towards Arabic. Born in Jerusalem in 1899 to a family of rabbis, Ben Ze'ev, born Wolfensohn, was a local Jew of Ashkenazi descent. His family was among the founders of the Mea Shearim neighborhood and of several of its important religious institutions, but it was not, his family was not among the well-off and notable, well-known Jewish families in the city of Jerusalem. As many other local families in Jerusalem, Tzfat, Tiberias, and Hebron, his family had long-lasting ties with Arab families. Ben Ze'ev grew up in an Arab-speaking environment with many Muslim neighbors and friends. In addition to Yiddish, he spoke Hebrew, Arabic, German, English, and French. He also held Ottoman citizenship, back in the Ottoman times, of course, and felt embedded, very much embedded in the Palestinian Ottoman environment. And again, this connects to what you talked yesterday about Yehuda. In 1919, he began studying in Dar al-Mu'allimin with some members of the local Arab elite members and received training as an Arabic teacher. Perceiving himself as embedded in the local Arab Levantine environment, he decided in 1922 to continue for his PhD studies in Arabic and Islam at the Egyptian University in Cairo. Studying in Cairo, Beirut, and Damascus was not uncommon among local Oriental Jews, as we see in the cases, for example, of Nissim Alul, Shimon Moyal, Eliyahu Sasson, all this group. As Aviv Deri Wexler, who is not here unfortunately today, but who wrote a fascinating MA work thesis on Ben Ze'ev, his decision, as she argues or suggests, his decision to study in Cairo reflects both his socioeconomic means, as well as his identity as an intellectual who was strongly connected to the local Arabic culture and language. Ben Ze'ev later studied for a second PhD degree at the University of Frankfurt, so now I'm connecting to the German aspect of things here. Like Nissim Alul before him, he returned to Cairo in 1933 to teach at the Egyptian University and Dar al-Ulum. He published extensively in Arabic and Hebrew, and wrote in the Arab dailies Al-Muqattam and Al-Haram, among others. In addition to his academic research and teaching, he was also very active among the Zionist circles in Cairo. He was the first president of the Hebrew Club, Moadon HaIvri, and was involved in the establishment of the Society of Young Egyptian Jews. He kept hoping to enroll into the Hebrew University School of Oriental Studies, but was never able to do so. He returned to Jerusalem in 1938 and became the supervisor of Arabic studies at the education department at the Yeshuv's National Council. Returning to Gershon Barak's letter that I started with, the letter that he wrote to Ben Ze'ev, it seems that his insistence in studying Arabic only with a local Jew, fluent in Arabic, was not unique. Indeed, during Ben Ze'ev's work at the education department, there were many debates regarding the position of local Jews specifically as Arabic teachers, and whether they had any advantage over Ashkenazi teachers who were not fluent in Arabic, or native speakers. For Ben Ze'ev, the study of colloquial Arabic was as important as the study of standard written Arabic, and hence the teacher's accent, his or her, usually his, ability to speak Arabic in class, and the degree of comfort with the language were extremely important. And here, of course, Klessner, of course, is the opposite case study, right? Ben Ze'ev located a difference between the pre-war and post-war periods regarding the nature of Arabic study, both from the teachers as well as from the students' perspective. Prior to World War I, Jews in Palestine were familiar with colloquial Arabic as part of their daily interaction and close relations with Arabs, and hence there was no need to pay special attention to colloquial Arabic in the curriculum of Jewish schools, he argued. Following the war, however, and with the growing Jewish immigration from Europe, as well as the growing national tension, the study of Arabic became much more challenging, he claimed. Jewish students have no contact with Arabs, they are unable to communicate in Arabic, and it is hence essential to expose them to colloquial Arabic, to the sound and dialect of the language, even before they learn to read, he argued. So this is apropos Safa Shimushit, and the question of what is Safa Shimushit. From the perspective of the teachers, before World War I, most of the Arabic teachers or the Arabic language teachers were Arabs who graduated from Al-Azhar University, many without any pedagogical training. After the war, Arab teachers stopped teaching in Jewish schools, and the Jewish teachers, especially those who came from Europe, were unable to speak with the proper accent and a difficulty in writing as well. Who are the Arabic teachers then? Various reports indicate that local Jews, including Sfaradim, Ashkenazim, and immigrants from Arab-speaking countries, formed the majority among the Arab teachers. Those included, for example, people such as David Avissar, Avram Sharoni, who wrote, some of you know, an Arabic-Hebrew dictionary and also taught in Tiberias and in Ganya, Dr. Yosef Yoel Rivlin, taught in Jerusalem, Dr. Israel Ben Zev himself, Ezra Mani, Dr. David Yelin, Yaakov Yoshua, Yitzchak Navon, Moshe Piamenta, and Yosef Meyuchas, among others. Some of these teachers were also involved in security-oriented activities, and this is a whole different story, which I won't get into it, but it's important to remember this. Many among those teachers were also engaged in other forms of Arabic teaching, writing and translating. Such was the case with Yaakov Yoshua, for example, who wrote extensively in the Hebrew and Arabic press and published monographs and memoirs about Sephardi life in Jerusalem, the Sephardi community in Jerusalem, and about the history of the Arabic press in Palestine. The Hebronite writer and teacher David Avissar, who was a poet and a publisher, and was active in the Association of the Pioneers of the East, among other organizations. David Yelin, who was a prominent, of course, intellectual teacher and writer, fluent in Arabic and active in the intellectual milieu of Jerusalem, who taught Hebrew and Hebrew literature at the Hebrew University and was among the main revivers of Hebrew. And Yosef Meyuchas, a member of one of the prominent Sephardi families in Jerusalem, a researcher and a teacher of Hebrew, Arabic, and French, among the leading figures of the Sephardi community back in the Ottoman era, as well as the mandatory one. And indeed, according to Ben Zeev, most Arabic teachers are Eastern-born, Edot HaMizrach. Again, the translation of these things is also very important, I think. Eastern-born, what is Edot HaMizrach? How do we translate Edot HaMizrach? It is also reported in the different reports of the education department that around 70% of the participants in the Arabic teachers' seminars initiated and organized by Ben Zeev belonged to the Oriental communities. Together with Ben Zeev, the Arabic committee members included representatives from the Arab department of the Histadrut and the Jewish Agency, from the Department of Education, as well as faculty members of the School of Oriental Studies at the Hebrew University. Some prominent figures among local Jews included, among other, Yitzchak Shamosh, Eliyahu Agassi, Yosef Yoel Rivlin, Yaakov Yoshua, Michael Asaf, and later Eliyahu Sasson, as part of his role as the director of the Arab Bureau in the Jewish Agency's political department. And this is apropos the connection between neighbor, enemy, security, etc. The views expressed by these prominent figures differed considerably from one another, so it's important not to put them all at the same time. Okay? Ben Zeev's commitment to the teaching of colloquial Arabic was very apparent in the discussions taking place both within the education department as well as in the various Arabic teachers training seminars that he organized between the years 1937 and 1944. Those discussions focused on the school curriculum of colloquial and standard Arabic, textbooks that can be used, pedagogical methods used by teachers, as well as the level of the teachers themselves. One of the issues discussed was the desired qualities of the teachers, as well as the difference between those who are native speakers of the language and those who are not native speakers of Arabic. Where there was a general consensus among the members of the Arabic Committee regarding the importance of studying colloquial Arabic, views regarding the quality of teachers and students who came from Arabic-speaking countries differed. Michael Dana, who taught Arabic in Hebrew high schools in the Real and others, and wrote several Arabic textbooks and an Arabic dictionary, argued, for example, that only a teacher whose native language is Arabic can teach Arabic. Colloquial Arabic should be taught while using Arabic script without transliterating it to Hebrew, the same way it is being taught elsewhere in the Arab world, he argued. A different view was offered by the Aleppo-born Yitzchak Shamosh, a member of the prominent Shamosh family and the brother of Tawfiq Tuvia and Amnon Shamosh. Yitzchak studied law and Arabic literature in Beirut and published frequently in literary journals in Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. Speaking in Arabic, the language that I feel more comfortable speaking in than Hebrew, as he said, during the 1941 convention of Arabic teachers who taught in the kibbutzim, Shamosh argued that it would be wrong to assume that every Arabic speaker can also teach the language. In fact, he claimed, the majority among Arabic teachers in Palestine do not fit to their jobs. At a different meeting, while discussing the curriculum for Arabic teachers seminars, Dr. Tzvi Banet, a professor of Arabic language and literature at the Hebrew University, raised the question whether teachers coming from Iraq, Syria, and Egypt should participate in these seminars at all. Are these teachers even able to understand the pedagogical and general education principles? He asked in a paternalistic tone, adding that maybe it would be better to leave the schools without teachers than to bring bad teachers to them. In September 1942, Ben Ze'ev reported that the majority among Ashkenazi Arabic teachers, most of them were graduates of the Hebrew University, had difficulty with their Arabic accent and pronunciation, and some also did not have enough knowledge of the grammatical rules. He also mentioned that the teachers among the native speakers needed some more practice in speaking more clearly. As for the students themselves, Ben Ze'ev suggested to take advantage of students who speak Arabic, who can demonstrate the correct pronunciation of words. It is clear then that the debates regarding the role of local Jews as potential teachers involved not only their actual professional skills or lack thereof, according to some, but other assumptions regarding their general knowledge and abilities, pedagogical and others. Ben Ze'ev also stressed the need to employ Arab teachers because the School of Oriental Studies at the Hebrew University did not provide strong enough candidates for the Arabic training courses that he conducted. He also encouraged the participation of teachers coming from Iraq, Syria, and Egypt in these courses. Some indeed participate. Muad Michael, for example, the principal of the Baghdadi Shamash School and one of the prominent Jewish writers in Iraq, participated in a 1943 teachers conference, and there were others as well. The attempt to create connections and to exchange ideas between Jewish teachers in Palestine and their colleagues from neighboring Arab countries was partially successful. In particular, Egypt was a destination for such exchange. David Avisar and David Yalin, for example, organized several visits of Eretz Israeli teachers to Egyptian schools and universities, the first of which took place in March 1926 with the participation of 90 teachers and Zionist activists. A month later, a group of 112 teachers and school principals who represented the Egyptian Ministry of Education visited Palestine. In April 1935, a group of 240 Jewish teachers, authors, physicians, and intellectuals from Palestine participated in another visit to Egypt, this time as part of the 800th anniversary celebrations of the Maimonides. In connection to his focus on the notion of cultural and intellectual exchange, and with the financial support of the Jewish community in Cairo, Ben Ze'ev established in Jerusalem an Arabic library for teachers, where he hoped to hold Arabic textbooks from the neighboring Arab countries, dictionaries, and Arabic literature, or literary texts. This library was aimed not only for teachers, but also for the Jewish and Arab communities in Jerusalem, so he was looking at it as like a public space in a way. The purpose of this library would be to enhance the links between the Jewish community in Palestine and the neighboring Arab countries, and to expose the Jews to Arab culture altogether. The notion of cultural exchange was presented by the representative of the Jewish community in Cairo, who donated the money, or most of the money for the library, who said that Ben Ze'ev is either the Egyptian cultural attaché in Eretz Israel, or the Eretz Israeli cultural attaché in Egypt. The participation and importance of Arab teachers, as well as the establishment of the Arabic library in Jerusalem as a bridge between people, cultures, languages, and communities, then show that the Zionization process of Arabic, as Mendel terms it, was not inclusive and was much more nuanced in many ways. Why was it important to study Arabic, and why mainly colloquial Arabic? Views on this question differed as well. David Yalin, for example, argued that for Jewish students to be able to be around Arabs, לבוא בסביבה ערבית, it is necessary to study colloquial Arabic, and only then, for those who would like to read and write, standard written Arabic should be taught as well. Dr. Alexander Doshkin, who established the Department of Education at the Hebrew University and was the first superintendent of Jewish schools in the mandatory government, added that it is very important that our children would not feel a stranger in his surrounding environment. The Damascene-born Arabic teacher Eliyahu Chabuba, mentioned earlier, who wrote 2 Arabic textbooks and was the founder of the Sephardi Association in Haifa and a teacher in the Reali school, as we heard, suggested to encourage the study of Arabic in schools by arranging visits to Arab villages and towns, establishing an Arab club which would offer lectures and seminars by Jewish and Arab teachers, as well as by visiting Arab cultural institutions. From the beginning of the 1940s, the Arab Bureau of the political department in the Jewish Agency, headed by Eliyahu Sasson, began to financially support the work of the Arabic Committee at the Department of Education. The political department supported some of the teachers' seminars that Ben Zeev organized, with a special emphasis on the training of teachers who could teach in the Jewish agricultural settlements, the kibbutzim and moshavot, and this is, I guess, apropos Leora's talk earlier. From a very practical standpoint, Sasson explained that it is known from experience that the lack of knowledge of Arabic among the Jewish settlers is not conducive in forming honest neighborly relations to the minimal degree necessary, and may cause needless clashes between the Jewish settlements and the surrounding Arab villages. End of quote. As Leora indicates, the emphasis put on the agricultural settlements, where Jews and Arabs often had daily contacts and interaction, demonstrated one of the functions that the study of Arabic had during this time, as a means of responding to the feeling of Jewish isolation within the Arab-speaking environment. In relation to this, Yoni argues that the growing involvement of the political department of the Jewish Agency indicates the gradual shift to the political security orientation of Arabic studies, which included the use of Arabic for propaganda, surveillance, and other security-related projects. But were there indeed 2 separate orientations? One that viewed the study and teaching of Arabic as a political undertaking, versus a second that emphasized its cultural and educational significance. Yoni Mandel argues that Ben Zeev and others were torn between their initial instinct of viewing the teaching of Arabic in an integrative, scholarly way, versus the growing urgency and insistence of the Zionist movement to teach and study Arabic for political, practical purposes. The balance between the integrative and security-focused rationales for teaching Arabic were tipped in the direction of the latter, argues Mandel, as a result of the heightened conflict. However, instead of looking at these 2 perceptions as dichotomous and at Ben Zeev as being torn between them, I would argue that in fact those 2 perceptions were bounded and strongly connected, and reflected the way local Jews viewed their special and unique role as one that combines their political and cultural spheres together. This unique approach can be termed cultural politics, a term that I borrow from Dr. Soloveitchik, the director of the Department of Education at the Hebrew University. Addressing the guests at a party held for the Arabic Teachers Conference in August 1945, Soloveitchik mentioned the 2 significant values of the Arabic study program headed by Ben Zeev. The first was what he termed cultural political significance of entering the Arab cultural world and locating common ground without losing the Jewish independent development. The second was the educational significance of mastering Arabic in schools. As Aviv Deri Wexler argues, Ben Zeev was by no means naive or idealist in his approach to the questions that I discuss here, namely the importance of the study of Arabic and the role it should play among Jews in the Yishuv. In the different projects that he was involved in, he kept viewing the Arabic language not from a scholarly distance, as was often the case with some of the scholars at the Institute of Oriental Studies at the Hebrew University, but rather quite intimately, as part of a local and regional culture and history. His biography as an Ashkenazi local Jew, educated and deeply embedded in the Arab world, enabled him to view the language as such and to influence the way the study of Arabic was thought of during the mandatory years. Ben-Zeev was not alone. In his perspective, he represented a larger group of intellectuals, writers, and political activists who shared the same approach, which viewed the political and cultural spheres as closely connected and viewed their own role as possible mediators between Jews and Arabs, between Palestine and the Arab world. So again, it's both Jews and Arabs in Palestine, but also between Palestine at large and the surrounding environment. Some of these intellectuals, such as Yitzhak, Tuvia, and Amnon Shamosh, Eliyahu Agassi, Yosef Yoel Rivlin, Yosef Meyuchas, and David Yelin, were also all involved in translating Arabic literature to Hebrew, in addition to more academic publications and research that involved Islamic studies, Arabic literature, and Middle Eastern history. Some, such as Agassi, also founded publishing houses for the publication of translated Arabic novels and short stories. In the suggested binary between the language of the neighbor versus the language of the enemy, Ben-Zeev and this group of local Jews insisted on the way Arabic can connect between people, neighbors, and cultures, even in high periods of national tension and violence. In this way, Arabic then was not only used for political purposes, but also served as a cultural bridge and connector. Thank you.
Thank you, Abigail. I think this talk corresponds very well with Yuval, the question of other futures or alternative trajectories. Just two announcements. First, Professor Rifat Weiss apologized. She had to rush off. She'll join us for lunch. And the other announcement is this little pearl here, which is a memorial speech by Kister
Not only,
to
Easter and a few other of his colleagues.
it's a lecture of Kister, a memorial speech by Felix Klein-Franke, and also a bibliography list of that Klein-Franke made.
So if you want to grab one, you're welcome. And I open the floor to questions. We have half an hour.
Just a remark. I'm very thankful. Thank you for both speeches. But I'm very thankful for this showing this connection between culture and politics, because I think in my speech yesterday, that was one aspect I wanted to emphasize, that even in Horowitz's plans, there were no separation between politics and this cultural aspect. And even to be scientific could be also a political meaning. And so that's something I think it's very important to don't in our head and to separate this and to connect this. The tragic and the question stays why in the university having something which divided this spheres, and that's a remark to Amir. That's a lot of when I think it's very important to remember that the German Jews coming to Israel had an experience really of this national conflicts and that they have all these wars in their head, one war after another, and their experience was it's better to keep the things separated. It leaves the scientific sphere as a sphere where we can talk without politics inside, and that's an experience they had, and I think it's very important to remember this awful century, not only the Second World War, starts in the First World War where politics are really used as a political tool, and that's something they learned to don't do this again. So and that's, I think that's something also important for Klassen. That's something here in his mind.
Yeah, I wanted to ask a question to Abigail, and I guess for others too. This notion of localness or nativeness seems a little bit slippery, because sometimes it refers to people born in Palestine itself, and sometimes it's taken to refer to people from other parts of the Middle East who happen to speak Arabic, and yet probably speak Arabic with a different dialect than the Palestinian dialect. So I'm wondering how much emphasis there was when, let's say, a person requested a quote-unquote local teacher, that it be a teacher who speaks Palestinian dialect. And I'm also interested if those notions changed over time as Palestine as kind of a potential national unit emerged. I just want to share one anecdote that I found in my research about the Mistarvim. I can't remember the name, but it was someone who came from probably Iraq who, you know, was kind of identified as a potential like person, you know, Mistarev, but then felt like he didn't speak the proper Arabic, so he went to Jerusalem and started taking lessons with a local such that he could learn like the proper Arabic to blend in and do his informant work. So just wondering if you can sort of clarify the sort of mix or mess of what these terms might have meant.
Thank you very much for the lectures. I have a question for Abigail about the cultural and political connection and vis-a-vis the people that were active in the end of the Ottoman Empire and then again in the British mandate in translation. You mentioned Yosef Miyuchas, Maliach, and David Yelin. Both of them did this project in the end of the 19th century and then in the 20s in the Dvir publishing house. It was many times that they did it, but in the end of the 19th century, if you see, they wrote introduction to each of their translations, like the Andalusian model that was very common in that time. But if you check the introductions in the end of the 19th century, they saw that the project of translation from Arabic is a project of borrowing from a great language that's very close to us, and to revive the Hebrew you have to go to Arabic, and you have to revive the Arabic, Judeo-Arabic tradition, and because Arabic is the language of the land and so forth, and in the 20s you see a different approach, and the different approach is part of what you talked about, what's happening to the Arabic, and Yoni is writing about it, and I think it's minorizing Arabic, and then in the introduction they will say we need to translate because we need to know the other, we need to know our neighbors. It's because, but then the division between Jews and Arabs are more present, and I think it's very interesting to see it. And I think that my thought, and I'll be happy to hear what you're thinking about it. I think that as they saw that their political, the major political project is clashing and is like collapsing in the 20s, they went into translation as a tool that they can still operate in it, but but they know that it's a minor project. It's not the same project that they had in the end of the 19th century, and it's interesting to me to hear what you think about it.
Well, to Amit, I have a headache question a bit, because Abigail kind of surveyed chronological development in the study of Arabic or different views, and Plessner's view was always very, to say it, very principled. So Abigail's questions vis-a-vis whether the identity of the teacher should be a person who can speak Arabic or not, and who this person should be, and whether, you know, even the paradigm of language of neighbor or language for communication or for culture. It will be interesting also to hear if you find also references to this in Plessner's writing. And thank you also, Abigail, for your lecture. And then I feel that I need a bit to defend and a bit to...
You don't have to defend at all. Not at all.
No, but also, and then to accept parts of it. When I speak about language of neighbor and language of the enemy, sometimes it sounds a bit too simplistic. And then maybe it's also true. But I would say that in the 1940s there are things that are happening. I didn't speak about it before because I kind of focused on the education system. But that there are things that are happening in the Jewish Yishuv in large. And I wrote here just a few, just that came out of in my mind. In the 1940s, we have the development of the Shai, Shirut Haidiot of the Haganah. Mistaravim of the Palmach established in 1943. Limud Aravit Banikudot, teaching Arabic in border points, is 1945. Palko, the Palestinian correspondent, which is a psychological warfare tool. Agence d'Orient, which operates from Egypt clandestinely, like as a security journal that is there in order to disseminate Zionist news in Arabic. South Sahyun, with a radio station that operates from here. The involvement of Yitzhak Ben Tzvi, which was unprecedented. 6 books that are being published about Arabic and newspapers. So all of these things together, sometimes they do not happen in the school system only, but they happen out there in the yeshuv, and they connect Arabic to new values. They could be political, they could be security, and also I understand. Like I met Avraham Inon in the last month or so, and he says, well, if you haven't been there, and it's very difficult to read history, so again, I'm not trying also here to be judgmental and to say it's really bad that Arabic was connected to security. I'm just saying that things happened in the 40s that didn't happen in the 20s. And I think that this is when I speak about it, I think this is important. As well with the Zionization of Arabic. That I think that it's not a process that happened only in the 30s, it's an ongoing process. And it is something that today maybe we should ask ourselves if today we are in an end of a development, or we are still part of this development. Today we still have 5 yechidot, 5 units of Arabic in school, but the vast majority, more than 70% of the students who choose to study it are doing this because they want to join military intelligence. So there is connections that is happening today, and it did not happen in the 1920s. And again, so maybe you can say, okay, but there are all kind of new, and we don't have Arabs to speak with because the Arabs could speak Hebrew and so on. So, but I think that this is a process that we should speak about. And lastly, about the connection that you said that, and I think you're right, that we shouldn't speak about two views that are kind of opposing each other, but as one view that has come together. And I think it's very clear in the 1970s that you have also Knesset bills that are speaking about teaching Arabic leshalom velebitachon, for peace and security, for security and peace. And Brigadier Ephraim Lapid has a famous quote saying, I think that Arabic should be taught for security and peace, for peace and security, and I absolutely do not see any contradiction between them two. אני בפירוש לא רואה שום ניגוד בין השניים. And while accepting his, while acknowledging that this is what he thinks, who else could say it? Could a Palestinian say the same? I think that Arabic should be taught for security and for peace, and I see no contradiction between them two. Of course not. Would maybe a person like Plessner, with a very progressive or peaceful views, would say, I think that Arabic should be taught for security and peace, and I definitely do not see any contradiction between them two. So I would say that even this new paradigm of security and peace, of neighbor and enemy together, is in its very essence a militaristic one. It's not a civil one. Mm-hmm. And so this kind of, because I would say that people who are coming from the military will be more likely to identify with this kind of symbiosis than maybe people who are either speakers of Arabic, Palestinian citizens of Israel today, or with different kind of political views, left of center, obviously. But I would agree that it would be too simplistic, from my side, for example, to say that there are two views and they kind of contradict, and that obviously it's something much more nuanced.
Okay.
To Rabbi, you mentioned the pedagogical issue relating to the potential teachers from the local teacher or those who are coming from Arab countries. But did the German-originated teachers who came to the Reali school, for example, there were a lot of them there, did they have any pedagogical
training?
Training? Nothing at all. From the point of view of my father, it was a disaster. He never planned to become a school teacher, and he never studied anything regarding to being a school teacher. So the problem was much larger than the...
We have a lot of questions, so maybe you can start answering them.
Okay, thank you very much for all those questions. I would like to start with Yoni actually, and say that there's nothing to apologize. And if you thought that there is something to apologize, not at all. I'm just relating with your fascinating work, which really helped me a lot in thinking about all these questions. And I totally agree with you. The 1940s was a period of accelerated security-related activity in all different fronts, in all kinds of fronts. And all this was taking place and happening, of course, and affected the study of Arabic and the way this whole, mechanism or this whole apparatus was taking place, of course. My argument, or our argument, I should say, me and Moshe's argument, is that this should not be separate, that in the view or from the lens of those local Jews, Bnei Haaretz, and I will relate to the problematics of talking about these categories at all, there was no separation. They were Zionists. They thought that, the Zionist project, most of them were Zionists, critical at some point, or some of them were, held different political views and objectives, but they both thought that, Arabic can be taught and thought about from this perspective, but also, not less importantly, should be used as a cultural, educational tool, and that was a completely different framework of thinking. And from here comes this whole issue and importance of also creating the links to the Middle Eastern locale, which I think is very, very important, and all the teachers' visits, etc., and the joint seminars and exchanges between teachers and between ideas and between students, etc., etc. So all these things for them did not contradict each other, and they worked side by side. And I think this is the unique, in a way, their unique perspective, which I try to explain here. And I totally agree with you. The 1940, there's a big difference between 1920 and 1940, huge difference. Those 20 years really mattered. 1936 mattered, 36, 39, the 29. And by the way, I agree with what Yuval said yesterday regarding Hillel Cohen's thesis about 29. And the Arab Jew and the death of the Arab Jew. I think the Arab Jew didn't die in 29. I have a problem with this argument. So this is Yoni. And I also agree, by the way, with what you said about the militaristic versus the civic paradigm. I totally agree to this. So we don't have any argument on this. It's just a matter of, I think, a different lens through which you look at those things. I want to relate, Liora, to what you said. Yes, so it's a very slippery slope. The whole and the question of how to even talk about these people, I think, is very interesting and problematic because, for me originally I was thinking about local Jews, okay, or Bnei Haaretz, and the big question for me was always how to even translate it into English. I don't know how to translate Bnei Haaretz, native of the country, native of the land, indigenous. Then you go into the question of indigeneity. I didn't want to get into it. So again, a very problematic question, even the term to be used. But for me, originally, instinctively, I was thinking about them as Sephardi, and that's it, right? Sephardi, Mizrahi today, or Edot HaMizrach, Middle Eastern countries, etc. And we know that this is not the case. Right? This is not the case. We can think about local Jews also as Ashkenazi Jews, born and raised here, speaking Arabic. So for me, I think the key here is the language in many ways. And not only the language, again, not only the language as a tool, but the language as a concept and as a cultural concept or concept or like, I'm losing the word, I'm missing the word. Never mind. As a cultural concept, let's say, okay, as a world, again, this connection between the Palestinian locale and the Middle Eastern locale, and the environment that is so connected to each other. And the question that you asked about the dialect in that respect, I didn't find any discussions really about the dialects in the archival material that I looked into. Maybe you saw something about it, but I do remember if you talked about anecdotes. First of all, yes, so there was this whole discussion about whether or not those who can speak Arabic, who are native speakers, are better than those who learned Arabic in order to, to teach the language, etc. But apropos mistarvim and dialects, there was a famous story that Eliyahu Sasson tells about his own experience traveling to Damascus as a mistarev, or as, Arab, dressed as an Arab, saying that he got out of his cab in Damascus, and people after I think it was 36, 39, or during the revolt, or right after the revolt, and people totally mistaken him for being an Arab because he spoke the dialect, the local dialect, etc. So dialects, of course, were very, very important, but I'm not sure that this was the main issue there about whether or not someone can speak Arabic. Or not, or native speaker. Now to Yuval. So I think that your question really relates to a much bigger issue, of course, which is an issue close to my heart, the transition. And I think the transition is super important for different aspects, but also for these people, because they, as you said, they lost their project. We also have to remember that during Ottoman times, late Ottoman period, they were the representatives of the Jewish community in Palestine. They were the representative of the Jewish millet, and we shouldn't forget this. The Zionists and those who didn't hold Ottoman citizenship didn't count for the Ottomans. So by transitioning, by losing, by the kind of the decline of the empire, they basically not only lost their big project or their big dream of an empire and multi-ethnic, multinational, but they also lost their own position, their own political power. And one of our argument in our book is that as part of this transition and as part of this losing power development, they are looking for new projects for themselves. One of these new projects, and we talk about it in different areas and scenes and fields, one of them being Arabic teaching, but there are others. One of them is this idea of mediation, different kinds of mediation, on different ways, educational, linguistic, and also security. But this is, of course, a very different kind of mediation, okay? But translation is another type of mediation, of cultural mediation, right? And I think that many of these people thought about these things differently during the mandatory years because they realized that it's not the same anymore, and because of the growing dichotomies between Jews and Arabs, of course, and the presence of the British and the losing of the local scene, basically. So definitely, I think that I see in this work of translation also a form of mediation, of cultural mediation. And Hagit, right? The pedagogical training, I think it's very interesting. Again, I didn't look too much about the German teachers and about their training, etc. But I think it's very, very interesting. What I try to emphasize here is the fact that those local Jews or Jews coming from Arabic-speaking countries, who wanted to teach Arabic were looked down at from this pedagogical angle. Whereas I haven't seen anything about, the German teachers who were looked down at because they didn't have enough pedagogical training. And again, I'm not sure whether maybe I'm not correct here because I really didn't look at these things specifically. But specifically, there were big debates about whether or not these people, the Arab Jews or the local Jews or whatever, are fit and are trained. And can we put our kids in their hands even? So I think it's much bigger in a way than just the question of dialect or just the question of language, etc. I think it refers to a bigger phenomena.
Okay. I'll start with Yoni as well, because he's the organizer. So. No, well,
I see.
So, I think. Well, I'm trying to recall if there is any direct comment about who should teach Arabic. I don't know. What I can say is that, well, first of all, we know that Plessner was looked at Horowitz, the founder here of the School of Oriental Studies. He was his assistant. He was also he looked at him as kind of a mentor. And Horowitz, we know from also from Sabine from yesterday, that Horowitz thought that Arabic should not, the basic rules should not be taught by Arabs or by local speakers, but should be taught by those who know the German linguistic, not philological, linguistic methods, the German way of teaching Arabic. And also we can look at Plessner's introduction to the grammar textbook, where he I think he said that something about the German method, and we looked at it yesterday, but I can't remember the exact phrase right now. But he did write something about that Arabic should be taught, at least at first, or in its basics, in the I guess German way. So who is more fit to teach in the German way than people who just came from Germany with this knowledge. Sabina, thank you for your comment. Well, you said that because of their war experience, their conflict experience, they preferred to keep the two separated. I think, well, my question here, and I'm not sure that I gave a really a complete answer, but that's something that we should bear in mind when discussing this. Was it even possible here in this space, at the heart in Jerusalem? You know, I kept thinking about it. I came yesterday to the Rosenzweig Center, and there is this view of the whole desert. So I'm thinking about a scholar coming from an Orientalist coming here to this scholarly center, the Orientalism Center of in Palestine, and then looking around, and he sees this desert around him, and you have all the images of the desert and what it might mean for a person coming from Europe. So I think it might be even impossible to really separate the two completely. But I think there was indeed an attempt to do that, maybe because of the recent experience from Germany and from other places. I would also like to add something in Liora's question and your answer. I'm not familiar with the subject. I know from my personal knowledge that Avraham Sharoni and Ezra Mani, for example, they were Iraqi Jews, and they came in the 40s, I think, 1940s.
Earlier, I think.
Earlier even. Yeah. So and there's no doubt if we can, maybe we can see some resemblance between the dialect in Damascus and the Palestinian dialect to some extent. It depends where, but we can definitely say that the Damascus dialect and the Iraqi Jewish or non-Jewish dialect, it's very different. So there is some kind of either adaptation or not. I don't know, something. So I guess they thought about it in a way at least. And lastly, I want to say about the pedagogical. Yeah, that's like the word of that. So I would just like to add that, well, while at least for Plessner, while he wasn't a teacher in Germany, he did teach at the university in Frankfurt, for example. When he first came, when Horowitz first invited him to Frankfurt, he invited him to teach Hebrew at Frankfurt. So it was at the university, not at schools. But still, there was some kind of previous experience of that. I don't know if pedagogical, but the basic training of teaching. Yeah. So that's something that I can add.
If I can just add to what Sabina was asking or was commenting earlier regarding the different experiences, I think this is actually very, very important, and also I think very important in understanding the difference. The way at least I see it, the difference between the view or the approach, the general approach of the European Jews or European immigrants, Zionist immigrants coming from Europe, second Aliyah, etc., versus Bnei Haaretz's approach. There's a different upbringing. There's a different socialization process. They have different things in their mind, right? I mean, they have different experiences. So I think that actually the experience of that the European Jews experience, the pogroms and all these things, and I'm talking about earlier years, not about the Second World War, but about earlier years, I think it's very, very, it's fundamental in order to understand the different worldviews.
Also what you mentioned, this empire
And the empire, exactly, and the experience of empire, right. Empire, Ottoman Empire, Habsburg Empire, I mean the question of different empires, different approaches.
National background, so that's
Right.
really,
I think this is crucial. Yeah.
yes, that's the point. I think it's really important.
It's really important, I think, too. Yeah.
So, in Ottoman Empire, you have this shift from one project to another, and the Germans who came here, they have totally another problem because they had not this project, they had another project in Germany, and then they have to choose this, and so this was.
Yeah, I think it's crucial.
Yeah.
In different aspects, not only in the one we're talking about here.
We have time for.
Yeah? Two remarks or maybe questions for further research. I don't know if you included the Ottoman period. You mentioned the first and the second Aliyah.
This is in the.
Okay, but did you think about it that the local Jews, Yishuv Yashan, what we call, together with the farmers of the first Aliyah and those who came during that time, for them, knowing Arabic and speaking Arabic with their neighbors and with the workers and everything was a matter of course. I mean, and even within the Hashomer, for example, in of the second Aliyah, it was a basic to be integrated within the Arabic neighborhood. So, not for, I don't think that they had the political consideration guiding them, but rather the very basic intention of an immigrant to integrate. Even if he has or she have national
Affiliation,
aims, yes, or affiliation. That's one, but I would think about not only about the local Jews, but also about those veterans who came during the Ottoman period and had in their mind, including Ben Gurion and Ben Tzvi, the idea to integrate within the local society. And for you, I think that you illuminated a very interesting contradiction in my father's attitude regarding, on the one hand, the academic principles, on the other hand, his abandoning, in a way, or at least compromising on political issues once they were contradicting each other. And I wonder if this is only a personal matter, or maybe that it represents I did research about Brit Shalom, and there was a big inclination among German Zionists toward Brit Shalom. And I wonder if this was a phenomenon that included not only Martin Plessner, but other Orientalists who were trained as Orientalists, but had the political view of Brit Shalom. And maybe this is more than a personal issue.
Yeah. You go first.
Okay, no, well, that is, I think it's a very important question, and I keep asking myself that exact question over and over, because there is a story, at least in some of its characteristics, repeating itself of a scholar, a German Jewish scholar, coming Orientalist, and it's not only your father with that story. Well, I do think that if we look at other scholars and maybe their way, each scholar, each Orientalist had his way of dealing with it. And I think, for example, if we look at Goitein, Goitein he kind of he had a shift in his scientific interests after coming here. And for your father, I don't think that's true. He remained quite loyal to his old interests. And I think that maybe we can look in there to find some of the answer. That requires, of course, further.
So I did look a lot, extensively into all these questions, and this is in the previous work that I did. And just very, very briefly, because I have a lot of things to say about it and we don't have time, but just very briefly, in addition to the language, which I think is crucial, I would argue that the citizenship aspect was crucial. Whether or not one was an Ottoman subject or Ottoman citizen or not. And I think that this is the interesting case, and I wrote an article about it specifically about the Ottomanization movement regarding Ben Gurion and Ben Tzvi, and how they suddenly became Ottomans, right? And Ottomanized, right? And were members of the Ottomanization Committee, etc. On the eve of World War I, as a way of basically, in a way, saying, okay, first of all, there is a matter, an issue of integration, but moreover, there is an issue of survival, right? Vis-a-vis, the Ottoman Empire, German, etc. during the war. So I would argue that it's not only an issue of language, but also an issue of citizenship and subjecthood of the Ottoman in the Ottoman Empire. And I think that there is a big difference between those who were. First of all, I have a problem, of course, with the Yeshuv Yashan, Yeshuv Chadash dichotomy, of course, needless to say. But because again, I think that this is very blurry, etc. All the things that we know already. But I think that also, not all Jews coming, in the second Aliyah knew Arabic, and not all of them felt that they need to integrate. And I think that the question of citizenship was crucial in that respect.
Okay. I thank the speakers. Yoni, what's happening next?
What's on that
next,
agenda?
well, there is a lunch in Betzalel, but it's kind of limited to speakers and the chairs. But so I'm sorry about it on behalf of the organizers. But we will meet at 2:30. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.